During a holiday weekend, my husband's cousin, a day trader, looked me up and down and smirked. "You work in finance? Let me guess. Your main job is handing out lollipops at the drive-thru window." A few people laughed. I didn't bother responding. Then his father turned toward me and asked one question. "What's the name of your LC?" The room went dead silent. I watched the smirk freeze on Soren's face. He didn't understand the shift in the room's atmospheric pressure, but he felt it. Everyone did. My mother-in-law, Harriet, paused with a serving spoon hovering over a bowl of potato salad. My husband, Declan, stopped stirring his iced tea. The only sound left in the dining room of that sprawling Adirondack timber lodge was the faint hum of a box fan in the window and the distant pop of a firework from across the lake. I've been coming to this family gathering for 8 years. The lodge smells like damp pine and old dust. The walls are covered in fading taxidermy, and the furniture is a collection of sagging plaid couches that swallow you whole. I love Declan's family. They are loud, deeply loyal, and predictably chaotic. Sullivan, the grandfather, always burns the hot dogs on a rusted charcoal grill. Harriet bakes a blackberry cobbler that takes 3 days of preparation. It's a comfortable, working-class rhythm. Soren was the anomaly. He is 28, wears loafers without socks to a cabin in the woods, and refers to himself entirely without irony as a crypto visionary. 2 years ago, he caught a lucky spike on a meme coin. He has spent every family gathering since making sure we don't forget it. He shoehorns his portfolio into conversations about the weather. He steers dialogue back to trades he executed or podcasts that validated his isolated genius. I am a senior forensic accountant for a private equity firm. I spend my days unspooling corporate fraud, tracing offshore shell companies, and auditing the fragile egos of men who think they are smarter than the paper trail they leave behind. I have 10 years in the field. I do not talk about my job on vacation. This year, Soren had arrived complaining about the suspension on his new $94,000 Porsche. He mentioned the sticker price within 10 minutes of parking on the gravel driveway. He brought it up again while unboxing sparklers on the porch, and a third time while his aunt was trying to organize the cooler. By the time we gathered for dinner on Saturday night, Soren had already delivered a localized TED Talk on the tax benefits of his offshore accounts. He told a long, rambling story about a brokerage intern who supposedly called him the most ruthless closer in the state. Soren recounted this with a straight face, looking around the folding tables as if waiting for applause. His girlfriend, Paige, sat next to him, nodding politely, her eyes glazed over with the fatigue of someone who hears this script every day. At the opposite end of the table sat Holt, Soren's father. Holt is a retired steelworker. He lost the bulk of his pension in a corporate restructuring back in 2018. He is a quiet, heavily bruised man who had spent the entire afternoon sitting on a sagging porch chair, nursing a single beer and watching his son perform. Soren had been mid-rant about market liquidity when he pivoted toward me, acting as though he had just realized I was occupying a chair at the table. That was when he delivered the lollipop line. I didn't say anything. 10 years of auditing has taught me that silence is a heavy weapon. People hate a vacuum. If you let it hang, they will inevitably rush to fill it, usually making themselves look worse in the process. I took a slow bite of my brisket. Then Holt set his glass down. It made a tiny, muted thud against the wood, but it was enough. The peripheral chatter died. "What's the exact name of your LLC?" Holt asked again, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "Blue Ridge Holdings," I said softly. I watched Holt's face. There was no theatrical gasp, no visible shock, just a heavy, settling exhale. The tension left his shoulders, replaced by a profound exhaustion. His gaze shifted down the table to his son, then back to me. It was the look of a parent watching their child brag while standing on borrowed ground. Soren looked between us, his brow furrowing. What does that even mean? Nobody offered an explanation. Half the table suddenly found the floorboards fascinating. Declan finally lifted his head, his jaw tight. Holt answered his son quietly, using a tone that requires zero volume to destroy a room. "It means her company bought the $850,000 medical debt from your mother's cancer treatments in 2021 and wiped it to zero." The table turned to stone. Holt's late wife had fought a brutal 4-year battle with ovarian cancer. The treatments, the experimental trials, the out-of-network specialists, it had nearly forced Holt into bankruptcy. The foreclosure notices had already started arriving when an anonymous holdings company absorbed the debt and issued a zero balance clearance. It wasn't magic. At work, I had been reviewing a bundle of distressed medical debt our firm had purchased for pennies on the dollar. We do an annual philanthropic write-off for tax purposes and PR. I saw Holt's name in the ledger. I flagged the accounts, pushed the paperwork to the top of the compliance pile, and authorized the clearance through our subsidiary, Blue Ridge Holdings. I didn't want credit. I didn't want Holt to feel like he owed me, or Declan, anything. I just didn't know Holt had tracked the subsidiary's LLC name down, or that he had held onto it, waiting to put the pieces together. Soren's face cycled through raw confusion and deep, unvarnished shame. He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at his plate. "You've been talking all afternoon," Holt said, his voice flat. "You should have asked a question first." Nobody laughed. Soren picked up his paper napkin, stared at it for a long second, and put it down. Someone at the far end of the table abruptly asked Sullivan about the upcoming election. The room came back to life around the edges, a forced, frantic murmur as the family collectively agreed to move on. Holt looked at me one more time before reaching for his beer. He gave a faint nod. No grand speech, just a silent acknowledgement from a man who had dropped a bomb and had absolutely no interest in cleaning up the shrapnel. Under the plastic tablecloth, Declan reached over, found my hand, and held it tight. We left the next morning. The goodbyes were strained. Soren was nowhere to be seen. Paige muttered something about him having a migraine and needing to sleep in. Holt hugged Declan, shook my hand firmly, and walked back up to the porch. The drive back to the city took 4 hours. The first hour was entirely silent, save for the rhythmic thumping of the tires on the interstate. The rain had started to come down, streaking the windshield and blurring the taillights of the cars ahead of us. Declan kept his eyes glued to the road. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He knew, Declan said suddenly. I looked over at him. Who knew what? Soren, Declan said, his voice tight. He knew exactly who you were before he opened his mouth at dinner. He wasn't just being a loudmouth, Cora. He was trying to rattle you. I adjusted my seatbelt. Rattle me why? Because I'm a woman in finance? No, Declan said. He signaled, switching lanes in the heavy rain. Because for the past 6 months, Soren has been quietly and methodically shorting Blue Ridge Holdings. I stared at the side of my husband's face. The wiper blade squeaked against the glass. Shorting Blue Ridge? I asked, making sure I heard him correctly. Blue Ridge is the parent firm. It's a privately held equity group with a publicly traded asset management arm. It manages $40 billion in assets. You don't short Blue Ridge unless you have institutional backing or a death wish. Where did you hear this? He was drunk on the porch on Friday night, Declan said, before you got in from the city. He was bragging to his buddies on speakerphone. He said he found a vulnerability in Blue Ridge's commercial real estate portfolio. He said he was heavily leveraged. He knew you were a senior auditor there. He thought if he could get under your skin this weekend, you might slip up and say something about their Q3 earnings or the commercial lease default rates. He was probing. I leaned my head back against the cold window. It wasn't just arrogance. It was desperation. If Soren was shorting Blue Ridge on margin and the stock wasn't dropping, which it wasn't, the firm was having a record quarter, he was bleeding cash on the premiums. The $94,000 Porsche was a lease. The offshore accounts were a smokescreen. He was underwater, and he was looking for insider information from a family member to save his own neck. On Monday morning, I got to the office at 7. The floor was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed as I logged into my terminal. I poured a cup of stale coffee from the break room and pulled up the public options chain for our asset management arm. Blue Ridge was trading at $82 a share, up 12% on the year. I couldn't legally access individual retail brokerage accounts, but I didn't need to. I knew how to look at the footprints people leave in the market. I spent 2 hours running searches on publicly registered LLCs tied to Soren's name. I found 3. 2 were dissolved. The third, Apex Capital Strategies, was registered to an address in Delaware, but routed back to an apartment building in Hoboken. Soren's apartment. I pulled the state property records. Soren didn't own the apartment. He was renting. I pulled the USC filings, Uniform Commercial Code records that show when someone pledges collateral for a loan. There was a fresh filing from 4 months ago. Apex Capital Strategies had taken out a massive line of credit from a secondary high-interest lender. The collateral listed wasn't a car. It wasn't real estate. It was a brokerage account. I stared at the screen, my coffee turning cold. The account number was partially redacted, but the custodian bank was listed, First National of Pennsylvania. That was Holt's Bank. My chest tightened. I leaned closer to the monitor, tracing the dates. 4 months ago, Blue Ridge announced a major acquisition of a logistics company. Our stock spiked 15% in a single afternoon. Anyone holding a short position would have been obliterated by margin calls. The broker would demand immediate cash to cover the losing bet. If Soren didn't have the cash, his positions would be liquidated, leaving him in massive debt. 4 months ago was exactly when the UKI filing was registered against the First National account. My desk phone rang, making me jump. I picked it up. Cora, a voice said. It was Holt. He sounded older than he had on Saturday. His breathing was shallow. Hi, Holt, I said, minimizing the windows on my screen. Are you all right? I'm at a diner on Route 9, he said slowly. I went to the ATM this morning to pull cash for the contractor fixing my roof. The machine ate my card. Said I need to contact the branch manager. I closed my eyes. Holt, I called the branch. Holt continued, his voice void of any emotion. They told me the account is frozen. They said something about a lien, a margin deficit. I don't know what these words mean, Cora. I worked in a mill for 40 years. I put my money in a savings account and a basic IRA. I don't have margin. He paused. In the background, I could hear the clatter of silverware and a waitress calling out an order. Soren has power of attorney on your accounts, doesn't he? I asked quietly. When Harriet got sick, Holt whispered. I was at the hospital every day. I couldn't keep track of the bills. Soren said he'd handle the paperwork. I signed a document. I never revoked it. Holt, don't talk to the bank yet, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. Don't talk to Soren. Where exactly are you? The Starlight Diner, he said. Can you come? I'll be there in an hour, I said. I hung up the phone. I looked back at the UKSI filing on my screen. Soren hadn't just made a bad trade. He hadn't just tried to use me for insider information. He had taken the last of his father's money, the money that survived his mother's cancer, and he had thrown it into a furnace to cover his own ego. I grabbed my coat and walked out of the office. The rain hadn't stopped since Sunday. It was coming down in thick gray sheets by the time I pulled my crossover out of the parking garage and merged onto the turnpike toward Route 9. The wipers violently slapped the windshield, but it barely made a difference. The Starlight Diner was a chrome-plated relic sandwiched between a discount tire shop and a shuttered strip mall. I found Holt in a corner booth in the back. The diner smelled like old fry grease and bleached coffee pots. Holt was staring into a mug of black coffee. He looked physically smaller than he had just 2 days ago at the lodge. The weekend had already aged him, but this was different. This was the slumped, heavy posture of a man who had just realized the floorboards beneath him were gone. I slid into the booth across from him. The red vinyl squeaked. I brought the receipts, he said. He didn't say hello. He just pushed a stack of crumpled ATM slips and a tri-folded letter from the bank across the sticky Formica table. table. I unfolded the letter. It was a standard notice of margin call and account freeze from First National. At the bottom, printed in heavy bold ink, was the deficit amount. Soren hadn't just zeroed out Holt's retirement. He had dug a massive crater underneath it. The deficit was $68,000. That meant the bank had already liquidated every stock, bond, and cash reserve Holt owned in that account just to cover Soren's bad bets, and Holt still owed them $68 grand. I looked up at Holt. He was watching my eyes, trying to read the severity of the damage on my face. "Tell it to me plain," he said, his voice raspy. "Your account balance is gone, Holt," I said, keeping my tone as steady as I could. "All of it. And the bank is saying you owe them another $68,000 to cover the rest of the losses." He didn't blink. He just reached out and turned his coffee mug a quarter inch to the right. "How does a man lose money he didn't even have? Because Soren wasn't just gambling with your money," I said, leaning in so the neighboring booths couldn't hear. "He was using your money as collateral to borrow more money from the brokerage. It's called trading on margin. He bet against my company. He bet that our stock would tank. When it went up instead, the broker demanded cash to cover the difference. When Soren couldn't produce the cash, they took yours." Holt looked out the window at the rain pooling in the potholes. "I worked at the Bethlehem steel plant for 32 years. I blew the hearing in my left ear. I got 2 bad knees. I saved every dime I didn't spend on Harriet's medical bills." "I know," I said. "He asked for the power of attorney when she went into hospice," Holt said, his voice completely hollow. He said, "Dad, you focus on Mom. Let me handle the math." I thought he was stepping up. I thought my son was finally growing up. He rubbed a thick, calloused hand over his face. "What do I do, Cora?" The branch manager, a guy named Caspian, said they're going to initiate collections if the deficit isn't cleared in 5 business days. I don't have $68,000. My pension barely covers property taxes and groceries. I pulled a pen from my purse and flipped over a paper placemat. "We need to look at exactly what Soren signed. The power of attorney you gave him, was it a general POA or a limited specific one?" "I don't know," Holt said. "It was 3 pages. He brought a notary to the hospital cafeteria." That made my stomach drop. "Holt, did he have access to the deed to the house?" Holt stopped rubbing his face. He looked at me, a new, sharper kind of fear piercing through the exhaustion. "The house is paid off. Has been since 2014. I need to know if he leveraged the house," I said. I pulled out my phone and opened the county property records portal. "What's the exact address in Scranton?" He recited it. I typed it in. The loading icon spun for what felt like an eternity. A waitress with a name tag that read Ren came over holding a fresh pot of coffee, but I put my hand over my mug. She moved on without a word. The page populated. I scrolled past the tax assessment history, bypassing the lot dimensions, straight down to the lien records. There it was, recorded 6 weeks ago. A home equity line of credit, drawn against the property for $150,000. The lender wasn't a traditional bank. It was a private, high-yield debt fund out of Manhattan, the kind of firm that specializes in predatory interest rates and rapid foreclosures. I stared at the screen. I couldn't breathe properly. Soren hadn't just drained the liquid accounts. He had mortgaged his father's paid-off home to double down on his failing short positions. He was chasing his losses, convinced he could make it all back before Holt ever found out. "Cora," Holt said. He was leaning forward now. "What is it?" "He took out a loan against the house, Holt," I said. "There was no way to soften it. $150,000, 6 weeks ago." Holt leaned back against the red vinyl. All the color drained from his face. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. He didn't yell. He didn't pound his fist on the table. He just closed his eyes. "He killed me," Holt whispered. "My own son killed me." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. His skin was freezing. "He hasn't killed you," I said. "Not yet. But I need you to do exactly what I tell you from this second forward." Holt opened his eyes. They were wet, but he didn't blink. He gave me that same faint, devastating nod he had given at the dinner table at the lodge. "First," I said, "we go to First National. We revoke the power of attorney immediately. We freeze everything that isn't already frozen. Second, I need a copy of that original POA document. If Soren forged your signature on the HELOC paperwork, or if the POA didn't explicitly grant him the right to borrow against real estate, we have a legal wedge. We can fight the lien." "And if the POA did give him that right?" Holt asked. "Then we hunt down where the rest of the money went," I said. "He leased a Porsche. He was bragging about offshore accounts. If he moved any of that HELOC cash into hidden retail accounts to shield it from margin calls, I'll find it. But we have to move now." I stood up, threw a $20 bill on the table to cover the coffees, and helped Holt out of the booth. He moved like a man walking to the gallows. When we got out to the parking lot, the rain was coming down harder. I unlocked my car and told Holt to get in the passenger seat. Before I started the engine, I pulled out my phone and dialed Declan. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, you're at the office early." "I'm not at the office," I said. "I'm in the parking lot of the Starlight Diner on Route 9. I'm with Holt." There was a beat of silence on the line. "Is he okay?" "No," I said. "Soren drained his retirement accounts. He traded them on margin. The accounts are liquidated and Holt owes the bank $68 grand in deficit." I heard Declan exhale sharply, a hiss of static over the phone. "Jesus Christ. I'm driving out there. I'm leaving work right now." "That's not all," I said. I watched Holt staring blankly out the windshield at the rain. "Soren took out a $150,000 HELOC against the house in Scranton 6 weeks ago. The house is collateral on a private debt loan." Declan didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was dangerously quiet. It was the same tone his uncle used to destroy the room at the lodge. "Where is Soren right now?" Declan asked. "I don't know. His Hoboken address is a rental. I haven't tracked his location yet." "I'll find him," Declan said. "Declan, do not do anything stupid," I warned. "If you tip him off, he might try to move whatever liquid cash he has left. We need him completely blind to the fact that we know about the house. I'm taking Holt to the bank to revoke the POA. You just see if you can quietly confirm if Soren went to work today. He doesn't have a real job, Cora, Declan snapped. He day trades from his couch and calls it a firm. Then call Paige. See if she knows where he is. I'm on it, Declan said, and hung up. I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the highway. The First National branch was 4 miles down the road in a tired strip mall. I parked in front of the glass doors. Holt unbuckled his seatbelt, but didn't move to open the door. Harriet picked the tile in the kitchen, he said quietly. We saved for 3 years to redo it. She loved that kitchen. We aren't letting him take the house, Holt, I said. I didn't know if it was a promise I could keep, but I made it anyway. We walked into the bank. It was quiet, smelling of institutional carpet and lemon floor cleaner. I walked straight up to the teller window. A young guy in a poorly fitted suit looked up from his monitor. We need to see Caspian, the branch manager, I said. Now, it's regarding an active margin freeze and a revocation of power of attorney. The teller blinked, clearly intimidated by the vocabulary. Do you have an appointment? No, I said. But you're going to go get him anyway, because the longer we stand here, the more liability this bank takes on for facilitating unauthorized margin trading on a senior citizen's account. The teller swallowed hard and hurried toward the back offices. A minute later, Caspian emerged. He was a middle-aged man with a neat beard and tired eyes. He ushered us into his glass-walled office and closed the door. Holt sat in one of the guest chairs. He handed his driver's license across the desk. I want my son taken off everything. Today. Right now. Caspian pulled up the file on his computer. He typed for a few seconds, his face impassive. Mr. Drent, I understand you're upset. The account freeze this morning was an automated system action due to the margin deficit. I see the POA here on file. We can revoke it, but it doesn't absolve the current debt on the account. We aren't here to pay the debt today, I said, stepping in. I need a printed copy of the original POA document that Soren Drent filed with this institution. Caspian looked at me. And you are? Cora, I'm family, and I'm a forensic accountant. Caspian hesitated, then clicked a few buttons on his mouse. He went to the printer in the corner of his office and retrieved 3 stapled pages. He slid them across the desk to me. I started reading. It was a standard New York State statutory short-form power of attorney. I scanned past the banking transactions, the claims and litigations, looking for the specific initial boxes. I found the section for real estate transactions. The box was checked. Next to it was Holt's initials. I looked closely at the ink. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, holding it close to the paper. Holt, I said. Look at this. He leaned over. That's my signature at the bottom. Yes, I said. But look at the initials next to the real estate section. Does that look like how you write your H? Holt squinted. No, I crossed my H high. This one is right in the middle, and the loop on the D is wrong. My pulse picked up. Soren had forged the specific authorities. He had gotten Holt to sign the bottom page in the hospital cafeteria, probably rushing him, telling him it was just for paying the medical bills. Then Soren had gone back and initialed the expanded powers himself before submitting it to the bank. Caspian, I said, looking up at the manager. Who notarized this document? Caspian checked the last page. A notary public named Adele Fairfax. Does she work here at the bank? No, Caspian said. It looks like an outside notary. I pulled up the state notary registry on my phone and typed in Adele Fairfax. The results popped up instantly. Adele Fairfax was a registered notary in Hudson County, New Jersey. She also shared a business address with Apex Capital Strategies. Soren hadn't just forged the initials. He had an associate notarize the fraudulent document. This is fraud, I said, dropping the paper onto Caspian's desk. The initials granting real estate authority were forged, and the notary is an associate of the grantee. This bank accepted a fraudulent document to authorize margin trading. Caspian's professional calm cracked. He looked at the document, then at his screen, then back at me. Ma'am, if you're alleging forgery, that's a matter for law enforcement. We process the paperwork as it's submitted if the stamp is valid. We will be going to the police, I said. But right now, you are going to put a hard freeze on every account tied to Soren Drent's social security number that touches this institution. And you are going to flag the $68,000 deficit as a disputed debt due to fraud. If you don't, my next call is to the state banking regulator, and I will make sure they know First National didn't do basic due diligence on a senior citizen's life savings. Caspian didn't argue. He turned back to his keyboard and started typing rapidly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Declan. I talked to Paige. She was crying. Soren packed a duffel bag and left their apartment at 5 a.m. He took her laptop and the spare keys to her car. He's running. I read the text twice. Soren knew the margin call was coming. He knew the bank would lock the accounts today, and he knew Holt would find out. He wasn't just hiding from the shame. He was fleeing the financial fallout. I looked at Holt. He was watching Caspian type, his face entirely expressionless, completely numb to the collapse of his family. It took Caspian 20 minutes to process the freezes. He typed with heavy, deliberate keystrokes, occasionally glancing up at Holt as if expecting the older man to break down. But Holt just sat there, staring at the small fake potted plant on the corner of the desk. When it was done, Caspian printed a stack of confirmation receipts. He pushed them across the desk. Holt didn't move. I took the papers, folded them into tight squares, and shoved them into my purse. The accounts are locked, Caspian said, his tone shifting into something a little more human, a little more pitying. No funds can move in or out, but the deficit is still on the ledger. The margin department will give you a grace period while the fraud claim is investigated, but you need a police report. Today, we're going right now, I said. I guided Holt out of the office and back through the quiet lobby. The drive to the local precinct took 10 minutes. The rain had slowed to a miserable gray drizzle, turning the road slick and reflective. Holt stared out the window the entire time. The police station was loud and smelled like wet wool and floor wax. We sat in hard plastic chairs for 40 minutes before a desk officer, a heavy-set guy whose name tag read Cahill, called us up. up. He looked exhausted. When I laid out the forgery, the margin account, and the fraudulent HELOC, Cahill just sighed and pulled out a thick stack of blue forms. There was no dramatic interrogation, no squad of detectives rushing out to hunt Soren down. Financial fraud is a paper crime, and paper crimes move at the speed of bureaucracy. Cahill asked Holt a series of blunt, clinical questions. Did you sign this? Did you verbally authorize this? Do you know the whereabouts of the suspect? Holt answered in single syllables. His voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I'm going to assign a case number, Cahill said, stamping the top sheet. A detective from the Financial Crimes Unit will be in touch, probably by the end of the week. But I'm going to be straight with you, Mr. Drent. Your son is out of state, he's got access to cash, and he's driving a vehicle that isn't reported stolen yet because the owner hasn't filed. This isn't a manhunt. It's a civil nightmare with a criminal edge. I just need the report number for the bank, I said. Cahill handed me a yellow carbon copy. Good luck. When we got back to my car, my phone started ringing. It was Declan. I answered and put it on speaker, resting the phone on the center console so Holt could hear. Where are you? Declan asked. Background noise filtered through, the sound of traffic and windshield wipers. We just left the precinct, I said. Accounts are frozen. Fraud report is filed. Where are you? I'm in Hoboken, Declan said. I'm sitting in my truck outside Soren's apartment building. Paige is in the passenger seat. She's a wreck, Cora. Did he hurt her? Holt asked suddenly, leaning forward. It was the most life he'd shown in 2 hours. No, Dad, he didn't lay a hand on her, Declan said, his voice softening slightly when he heard his father. But he gutted her. What did he do? I asked. She woke up at 5 this morning, Declan explained. Soren was throwing clothes into a duffel bag. When she asked what was going on, he told her his brokerage accounts were locked for a routine audit and he had to go to Delaware to sort it out in person. He asked to borrow her laptop and her car keys because his Porsche was in the shop. The Porsche is leased, I said. If he defaults, they'll repo it. He left it behind on purpose so he couldn't be tracked by the dealership's GPs. It gets worse, Declan said. After he left, Paige tried to buy a coffee down the street. Her debit card declined. She logged into her banking app. Soren drained their joint checking account. $8,000 gone. Then she checked her credit cards. He maxed out 2 of her cards on cash advances yesterday afternoon. I gripped the steering wheel. Soren wasn't just running. He was scorched earth running. He was stripping every asset around him for liquidity before the walls closed in. He knew the HELOC money was locked in the margin deficit. He knew Holt's retirement was gone. He needed operating cash, so he cannibalized his girlfriend. How much cash did he pull from her cards? I asked. 15 grand, Declan said, plus the 8 from checking. He's got 23,000 in cash, Paige's laptop, and her Honda Civic. Tell her she has to report the car stolen, Declan, right now. I already tried, Declan said, frustration leaking into his voice. She won't do it. She's sitting here crying, saying she gave him the keys, that he told her he'd bring it back. She's in denial, Cora. She thinks he's actually in Delaware fixing an audit. Put her on the phone, I said. There was some shuffling, the muffled sound of Declan speaking quietly, and then a shaky, wet breath filled the speaker. Cora? Paige's voice was small, terrified. Paige, listen to me, I said, dropping into the same tone I use when I have to depose a hostile corporate controller. Firm, unyielding. Soren is not in Delaware. He is not fixing an audit. He forged his father's signature, stole his retirement, and mortgaged his house to cover a massive stock market loss. He is running from a federal bank fraud charge. Silence on the other end. Just the sound of her crying. I know it hurts, I said, but you have to stop protecting him. He left you with no money and $20,000 in credit card debt. If you don't report that car stolen, you are aiding his flight. When the police catch him, and they will catch him, they will look at you as an accomplice. You need to call the Hoboken police right now and report the vehicle and the cash advances. He said he loved me, Paige whispered. He loves himself, I said. Give the phone back to Declan. A moment later, Declan was back. Yeah, take her to the Hoboken precinct, I told him. Don't ask her. Just drive there and walk her inside. If she balks, tell her I will personally call her parents and explain that she's harboring a fugitive. Then drive out here to Holt's house. I'm taking him home. I'll be there in 2 hours, Declan said. He hung up. I looked over at Holt. He was staring at his hands, resting heavy on his knees. The knuckles were thick, scarred from decades of mill work. Let's go home, Holt, I said gently. I put the car in gear and drove towards Scranton. The whole way there, my mind was running the numbers. The $68,000 margin deficit at First National was a mess, but with the fraud report, we could likely get the bank to eat the loss and write it off. Banks have insurance for this. They would pursue Soren directly. The real problem was the HELOC, $150,000, backed by a private debt fund in Manhattan. Private funds don't play by the same rules as retail banks. They don't care about forged initials if the notary stamp looks valid. They bought a secured debt against a physical asset, and if that debt isn't serviced, they will initiate foreclosure. They want the house. It's cleaner for them to take the property, flip it, and pocket the equity than it is to chase a missing day trader. When we pulled into Holt's driveway, the reality of it seemed to hit him all over again. It was a modest, single-story ranch house with faded blue siding. The lawn was perfectly cut. A small flower bed of marigolds lined the front porch, Harriet's favorite. This house was the only tangible thing Holt had left to show for 65 years on Earth. We walked inside. The house smelled like old books and peppermint. It was immaculately clean. I need to see the mail, Holt, I said as he took off his jacket. Everything you've received in the last month. Bills, bank statements, junk mail, anything you didn't open. Holt walked into the kitchen and pointed to a stack of envelopes on the counter next to the microwave. I haven't opened much since the weekend. Soren usually came by on Sundays to help me file it. Of course he did, I thought. He was intercepting the notices. I grabbed the stack and sat at the small wooden kitchen table. I started tearing through envelopes. Electric bill, water bill, bill, a flyer for a local roofer, and then a thick, premium stock envelope with a Manhattan return address, Wyndham Capital Partners. I ripped it open. It was the first monthly statement for the HELOC. The principal was $150,000. The interest rate was a predatory 14%. The first monthly payment of $7,750 was due in 3 days. I read the fine print at the bottom of the statement. My blood went cold. The loan wasn't structured like a traditional home equity line, where you draw down what you need. It was a lump sum disbursement. The entire $150,000 had been wired out on the day of closing. Soren hadn't left the money sitting in an account to cover his margin calls over time. He had taken the whole chunk at once. Holt, I said, looking up. Did Soren ever mention a company called Wyndham Capital? Holt shook his head. He was standing by the sink, looking lost in his own kitchen. No, never. I pulled out my laptop and connected to my phone's hotspot. I ran a quick background check on Wyndham Capital Partners. They were a distressed debt acquirer. They loaned money to high-risk borrowers at exorbitant rates, fully expecting them to default so they could seize the collateral. They were sharks, and Soren had thrown his father right into their tank. But where did the $150,000 go? I logged into the state's corporate registry again, bypassing the standard search and using a backdoor terminal access I retained from a previous firm audit. I needed to see if Soren had set up any new shell companies in the last 6 weeks. If he took a lump sum that size, he didn't put it in his personal checking account. He would have parked it somewhere to avoid it getting automatically swept up by his failing brokerage accounts. I searched his name. Nothing new. I searched Paige's name. Nothing. Then I thought about the notary. Adele Fairfax. I typed her name into the registered agent database. 3 LLCs popped up. 2 were defunct real estate holding companies. The third was registered exactly 5 weeks ago, 1 week after the HELOC closed. Nova Horizon Logistics LLC. I clicked on the filing documents. The registered agent was Adele Fairfax, but the listed managing member was a name that made me stop breathing. Harriet Drent. Soren didn't just steal his father's house. He used his dead mother's name and social security number to open a shadow company to hide the stolen money. I stared at the screen, the harsh white light of the state registry database illuminating the dust motes floating over the kitchen table. Holt was still standing by the sink, his hands gripping the edge of the Formica counter. I didn't want to tell him. Everything up to this point was financial ruin. This was desecration. Holt, I said. My voice was entirely flat. I need you to come look at this. He walked over slowly. He leaned down, squinting at the small text on my laptop screen. He read the words Nova Horizon Logistics LLC. He read the registered agent. And then his eyes hit the line for the managing member, Harriet Drent. Holt didn't gasp. He didn't cry. He made a sound in the back of his throat like a dying engine turning over. He put his hand on the back of my wooden chair and gripped it so hard the wood creaked under the pressure. She's been dead for 3 years, he whispered. He used her social security number, I said, pointing to the federal INN registration attached to the filing. He opened a shell company in her name so he could wire the $150,000 from the house loan into an account that wasn't tied to him. He knew the margin call was coming. He knew his own accounts would get frozen. So he built a lifeboat using your wife's identity. Holt stood up straight. The numbness that had carried him through the morning at the bank and the police station vanished. It was replaced by a rigid, terrifying stillness. He dug up his mother, Holt said, for money. The front door opened. Declan walked into the kitchen, his boots tracking rainwater onto the linoleum. He stopped when he saw his father's face. Dad? Declan asked. Holt didn't answer. He turned around, walked into the living room, and sat down in his worn armchair. He stared straight ahead at the blank television screen. Declan looked at me. What happened? I turned the laptop around. I walked him through the Wyndham Capital HELOC statement and the LLC filing. I watched my husband's jaw lock. The muscles in his neck tightened into thick cords. Declan is a calm man. He builds custom cabinetry. He measures twice and cuts once. But right now, I could see him calculating the physical distance between Scranton and Hoboken, and exactly what he was going to do when he covered it. I'm going to kill him, Declan said quietly. You're not going anywhere, I said, standing up and grabbing his arm. If you touch him, you go to jail, and Holt loses the house anyway. We have 3 days before the first payment on this HELOC is due, $1,750. If we miss it, Wyndham Capital files a notice of default. They will trigger a penalty interest rate of 24% and start the foreclosure process. The loan is fraudulent, Declan argued, his voice rising. The power of attorney was forged. The notary was in on it. Wyndham doesn't care, I said. They are a predatory private lender. They have a signed document and a valid notary stamp from Adele Fairfax. Until a judge rules it fraud, the debt is legally attached to this house. We have to make the first payment. With what? Declan asked. Dad's accounts are at negative $68,000. With our money, I said. We pay it to buy us 30 days. And in those 30 days, I am going to rip Soren's paper trail apart until I find where he put the $150,000. Declan looked into the living room at his father. He nodded once. Do it. I sat back down at the kitchen table. I needed to know what Nova Horizon Logistics actually did. A shell company is just a bucket. You have to look at what the bucket is holding. I opened a new tab and pulled up a paid commercial property database I use for work. It aggregates lease agreements, UC filings, and municipal tax records. I typed in Nova Horizon Logistics. Nothing popped up in Pennsylvania. Nothing in Delaware. I changed the search radius to New Jersey. The database churned for 10 seconds, then spit out a hit. It was a commercial lease agreement, signed 4 weeks ago. The tenant was Nova Horizon Logistics. The guarantor was Soren Drent. I clicked on the address. It was a suite in a Class A commercial high-rise in Jersey City, right on the waterfront, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. I pulled up the building's management website and looked at the leasing rates. Prime commercial real estate. Floor-to-ceiling windows. State-of-the-art server rooms. The rent for a mid-level suite was $12,000 a month. I read the lease terms on the database. It required a 12-month upfront deposit to secure the space for a new LLC without established credit. 12 months at $12,000 a month. $144,000. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. Declan, I said. He walked back into the kitchen. What? He didn't put the money in an offshore account, I said, tracing the lines on the screen with my finger. He didn't buy crypto to try and win it back. He leased an office. Declan frowned. An office? For what? For himself, I said, to look like a real firm. He was playing CEO. He took the money from your father's house, laundered it through your dead mother's name, and used it to pay a year's rent in advance for a luxury waterfront office in Jersey City. He spent $144,000 on floor-to-ceiling windows and an address he could put on a business card. Declan stared at me. The sheer, pathetic vanity of it hung in the air between us. Soren hadn't stolen to survive. He had stolen to maintain his illusion. So the money is gone, Declan said flatly. It's sitting in the escrow account of a commercial property management group, I said. And breaking a commercial lease to claw back an upfront deposit takes a corporate lawyer and a miracle. Even if we prove fraud, the management company will argue they signed the lease in good faith. They'll fight to keep the deposit. The kitchen phone rang. It was an old landline mounted on the wall, one of the heavy plastic models from the 90s. It startled us both. Declan walked over and answered it. Hello? He listened for a few seconds. His expression hardened. No, Mr. Drent is not available to come to the phone. Who is calling? A pause. Stellan who? Declan asked. From Wyndham Capital. My pulse jumped. It had only been a few hours since the margin call. The traditional bank system was slow, but private debt funds had automated triggers. They must have been alerted to the freeze on Holt's First National account. Listen to me, Stellan, Declan said, his voice dropping an octave. That loan was executed through a forged power of attorney. We filed a police report this morning. You aren't getting a dime. I stood up and waved my hands frantically, mouthing the word no. You don't threaten private debt collectors. You give them nothing. Declan ignored me. He listened to whatever the man on the other end was saying. The color slowly drained from his face. He hung up the phone without another word. What did he say? I asked. Declan looked at me, his eyes hollow. He said they already know about the police report. Adele Fairfax, the notary, called them an hour ago. She told them Holt is suffering from severe dementia and that his family is trying to invalidate the loan to avoid paying the debt. Stellan said Wyndham has exercised their acceleration clause due to anticipated default. Acceleration clause? I asked, though I already knew what it meant. The first payment isn't due in 3 days anymore, Declan said, looking toward the living room where his father was sitting in silence. The entire $150,000 is due by Friday, or they take the house. I stared at him, the heavy plastic receiver still dangling from his hand. The cord swayed slightly, a yellow coiled spring in the silent kitchen. Friday, 4 days. Wyndham wasn't acting like a bank. Banks send 30-day notices by certified mail. Banks have compliance departments. Wyndham was acting like a knee-breaker in a tailored suit. They knew the loan was dirty. Adele Fairfax calling them to claim Holt had dementia was a preemptive strike. It was designed to legitimize their acceleration clause before we could get a judge to look at the forged initials. I took the receiver from Declan and hung it up. The click was loud. They can't do that, Declan said. His voice was shaking, not with fear, but with a kind of suppressed violence that made my chest tight. They can't just take a house in 4 days on a phone call. They can start the process, I said, keeping my voice dead level. If they file the notice of default and we don't file a temporary restraining order to block it, they can force a sheriff's sale. They are betting we don't have the cash to fight them in court. Declan looked at the doorway to the living room. Holt was still sitting in the armchair. He hadn't moved. He looked like a statue left out in the rain. We have some savings, Declan said, dropping his voice to a harsh whisper. We have $40,000 in our joint. I can liquidate my IRA. It'll take a massive tax hit, but I can pull another 50. No, I said instantly. Do not touch your IRA. If you pay Wyndham a single dollar, you legitimize the debt. You establish a pattern of repayment. Legally, it means you accept the loan is valid. Once you pay them, you can never claim fraud again. Then what do we do, Cora? Let them take his house on Friday? We get a lawyer who eats bottom feeders for breakfast, I said. I pulled out my phone and walked out onto the back porch. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy and smelled of wet asphalt and cut grass. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Emery Novak. Emery was external counsel for the private equity firm where I worked. She billed at $900 an hour and had the bedside manner of a circular saw. We had worked together on a messy corporate embezzlement case 2 years ago. I didn't have her retainer fee liquid, but I had a mountain of institutional goodwill. She answered on the third ring. Cora, I'm in a deposition in 10 minutes. Is your firm getting sued or are you? Neither, I said. I need a favor. A massive, off-the-books favor. I gave her the 3-minute version. The forged power of attorney. The margin deficit. The fraudulent HELOC. The shell company using a dead woman's social security number. And Wyndham Capital's phone call accelerating the debt to Friday based on a notary's lie about dementia. Emery didn't interrupt. When I finished, she let out a sharp breath. Wyndham, Emery said. Of course it's Wyndham. They buy toxic debt on purpose. They want the real estate. Stellan is a glorified collections thug with a law degree. Can you file a TRO to stop the default? I asked. I can draft a temporary restraining order by tomorrow morning, Emery said. But to get a judge to sign it ex parte, without Wyndham in the room, we need to prove imminent, irreparable harm and a high likelihood of success on the merits. The harm is obvious. It's a primary residence. The success on the merits is the problem. The initials are forged, I said. Doesn't matter for a TRO, Emery countered. Notary stamps carry the presumption of validity in court. Adele Fairfax is a licensed bonded officer of the state. If she testifies that Holt Drent was sitting in front of her, signed the document, and appeared of sound mind, it's his word against hers. And she already planted the dementia seed with Wyndham. If I go to a judge right now, Wyndham will argue it's just a family dispute over a regretful loan. The judge will deny the injunction and let the default proceed. I gripped the wooden railing of the porch. So how do we stop it? You need to break the notary, Emery said flatly. You need Adele Fairfax to recant her stamp, or you need proof she's complicit in the fraud. If you can get me something concrete that proves she's lying, I can walk into chambers on Thursday and get an injunction that freezes Wyndham in their tracks. She's in New Jersey, I said. Then you better go for a drive, Emery said. I'll start drafting the motion. Don't call me until you have a smoking gun. She hung up. I walked back inside. Declan was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the HELOC statement. Pack a bag for Holt, I said. Take him back to our place in the city. Do not let him answer the phone. If a process server shows up here, I don't want Holt anywhere near the front door. Where are you going? Declan asked, standing up. Hoboken, I said. I'm going to have a conversation with a notary. The drive to New Jersey took 2.5 hours. The sky remained bruised and overcast, matching the gnawing exhaustion in my stomach. I hadn't eaten anything since the brisket at the lodge, but I wasn't hungry. Adrenaline had entirely replaced my metabolism. I pulled up the state notary registry on my phone while sitting in traffic on the George Washington Bridge. Adele Fairfax's registered business address wasn't the luxury waterfront high-rise in Jersey City that Soren had leased. It was a strip mall in Bayonne, wedged between a discount liquor store and a laundromat. I parked my crossover in the cracked asphalt lot. The sign above the door read Fairfax Financial and Tax Prep. The windows were heavily tinted. I walked in. The office was small, suffocatingly warm, and smelled intensely of vanilla air freshener. A desk sat in the center of the room, buried under stacks of manila folders. Behind it sat a young woman, maybe 25, wearing a cheap blazer and aggressively manicured acrylic nails. She was scrolling through her phone. Are you Adele? I asked. She looked up, annoyed. Walk-ins are only for simple returns. Anything else requires an appointment. I don't need a tax return, I said. I pulled one of the visitor chairs out and sat down without being invited. I placed my purse on the floor. I folded my hands on her desk. I need to talk to you about Holt Drent. Adele's hands froze. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a sudden, sharp panic. She set her phone face down on the desk. I don't know who that is. You do, I said. My voice was calm, conversational. You called Wyndham Capital this morning and told a man named Stellan that Holt Drent suffers from severe dementia. You did this to legitimize a forged power of attorney that you illegally notarized 6 weeks ago. You need to leave, Adele said. Her voice wavered. She reached for her desk phone. If you pick up that phone, my next stop is the county prosecutor's office, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I just let the weight of the reality settle into the small, hot room. My name is Cora. I am Holt Drent's daughter-in-law. I am also a senior forensic accountant for a private equity firm in Manhattan. I spend 40 hours a week dismantling corporate fraud structures. You are sitting in the middle of one. Adele pulled her hand back from the phone. She swallowed hard. Soren told me the paperwork was fine, she said defensively. He said his dad was sick and couldn't travel. Soren lied, I said. Holt is perfectly healthy. He was never in this office. He never presented you with a valid ID. You stamped a document transferring the rights to a paid-off home, and then you stamped the HELOC paperwork to withdraw $150,000. And then, you registered a shell company called Nova Horizon Logistics using the social security number of Harriet Drent, a woman who died of ovarian cancer 3 years ago. Adele's face went chalk white. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. He didn't tell you about the dead mother, did he? I asked quietly. She shook her head, a slow, terrified movement. He said, Nova Horizon was just a holding company for a new logistics software he was developing. He paid me $2,000 to act as the registered agent and handle the mail. He used you, I said. He committed identity theft, elder abuse, and federal wire fraud. Because that money crossed state lines from a Manhattan lender to a Pennsylvania property, the FBI has jurisdiction. The mandatory minimum for wire fraud affecting a financial institution is 10 years. You are the registered agent on the shell company that received the stolen funds. You are the notary who facilitated the theft. Right now, on paper, you are the prime suspect. Adele started to cry. It wasn't manipulative crying. It was the ugly, hyperventilating panic of someone realizing their life is entirely over. She pressed her long acrylic nails against her forehead. I didn't know. She sobbed. I swear to God. We went to high school together. Soren just said he needed a favor. He said he was going to make me head of HR at his new firm once the funding cleared. I just stamped the papers. I didn't know the mom was dead. I believe you, I said. It was the truth. Adele wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was gullible, greedy, and stupid. But Wyndham Capital doesn't care. They are foreclosing on my father-in-law's house this Friday. I need you to sign a sworn affidavit right now, admitting that Holt Drent was not present for the notarization, that the signature was forged, and that Soren instructed you to call Wyndham this morning. Adele wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara. If I sign that, I lose my notary commission. I could go to jail. If you don't sign it, I said, leaning closer, I walk out that door. Call the state attorney general and hand them the LLC filings, the forged POA, and the lease agreement for the Jersey City office. You will be indicted before Thanksgiving. Soren is already running. He drained his girlfriend's accounts this morning and fled. He is leaving you to take the fall. That broke her completely. The illusion of the high school friend, the promised HR job, it all shattered. She pulled a legal pad from her drawer. Her hands were shaking violently. What do you want me to write? I dictated the affidavit word for word. I made her list the dates, the specific documents, and the exact amount Soren had paid her. I made her detail the phone call with Wyndham. When she finished, I had her sign it and affix her own notary seal to her confession. A bitter piece of irony. I took the pad, tore the sheet off, and carefully folded it into my purse. "Thank you," I said, standing up. "Is that it?" Adele asked, her voice hollow. "Am I okay?" "I'm not a cop," I said. "I'm just a woman trying to save her family's house. What happens to you next is up to the state. But you need to call a lawyer." I turned to leave, my hand on the glass door. "Wait," Adele said. I stopped. I didn't look back at her. "Soren didn't just lease that office in Jersey City," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, heavy with residual panic. The mail that came here for Nova Horizon. I opened some of it before I forwarded it to him. I turned around. "What was it?" "Equipment invoices," Adele said. "Heavy machinery, commercial stuff, dozens of them, totaling almost $300,000. I frowned. "Soren is a day trader. He doesn't know anything about logistics or machinery. Why is he buying equipment?" "He's not buying it," Adele said, looking down at her desk. "He's insuring it." The vanilla air freshener suddenly felt thick enough to choke on. "Explain that to me," I said. "The invoices are fake," she said, her voice shaking again. "He had me set up Nova Horizon as a freight logistics company. He leased the Jersey City office to look legitimate to the underwriters. He generated fake purchase orders for industrial equipment. Then, he took out a massive commercial insurance policy on the inventory." I felt the blood drain from my face. I understood exactly what she was saying. The $144,000 in upfront rent wasn't vanity. It was a setup cost. Soren was building a paper company. He was establishing a physical presence, generating fake assets, and insuring them against loss or damage. "When does the policy take effect?" I asked. Adele looked up at me. Her eyes were completely hollow. "It already did," she said. "Last Friday. And he told me this morning, before he turned his phone off, that there was a major flood at the warehouse holding all the equipment. Soren wasn't just running from a margin call. He was staging a multi-million-dollar insurance fraud, and he was doing it all in Harriet Drent's name." "Who is the underwriter?" I asked Adele. My voice was completely steady. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk, her hands trembling so badly she fumbled the handle twice. She pulled out a thick, glossy folder and slid it across the scratched wood. "Meridian Casualty," she whispered. I opened the folder. The declarations page was right on top. The policy limit was $4.2 million. Soren had gone all in. He had manufactured a phantom logistics empire, insured it for millions, and then immediately claimed a total loss to cash out. He wasn't just trying to cover his margin calls anymore. He was trying to retire on a federal crime. I didn't call Emery yet. I didn't call the police. I took out my phone, snapped pictures of every single page in that folder, and put it back on Adele's desk. "Do not warn him," I told her. "If you text him, if you call him, you go down for conspiracy. You sit in this office and you wait for the lawyer." I walked out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, locked the doors, and looked up the number for Meridian Casualty's Special Investigations Unit. Insurance companies don't wait for police reports to protect their money. They have their own fraud divisions, staffed by former federal agents and forensic accountants who live for this exact kind of tip. A director named Fenn picked up on the third ring. I didn't give him an emotional family story. I spoke his language. I gave him the math. I gave him the fake LLC, the Jersey City address, the forged equipment invoices, and the fact that the primary policyholder, Harriet Drent, had died in 2021. "The claim was filed this morning," I told him, watching the rain start to mist on my windshield again. "He's expecting an expedited payout. If you wire that money, it's going offshore and you will never see a dime of it again." Fenn was quiet for a few seconds. I heard the rapid, heavy clacking of a keyboard. "I'm freezing the claim," he said, his voice dropping into a flat, professional deadpan. "And I'm flagging this for the FBI field office in Newark. We don't underwrite ghosts." That was it. That was the kill shot. I called Emery on my way back to the city. I told her about the insurance fraud, the Sue freeze, and Adele's sworn affidavit. Emery actually laughed. It was a dry, terrifying sound. "Wyndham is done," she said. "If the HELOC funds were used to seed a multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud, the loan is toxic. The Department of Justice will seize the entire paper trail. Wyndham will drop the foreclosure tomorrow just to keep federal investigators out of their own ledgers." She was right. Emery filed the injunction on Thursday morning. She attached Adele's affidavit and a formal notice of the active Meridian Sue investigation. Stellan from Wyndham Capital didn't even show up to the hearing. Their legal department emailed Emery a formal withdrawal of the default notice before the judge even took the bench. They dissolved the lien on Holt's house by Friday afternoon. They wrote off the $150,000 as a total loss. For a predatory debt fund, it was just the cost of doing business. Soren didn't make it to the weekend. He didn't get a dramatic shootout. There was no high-speed chase. He was sitting in the lobby of a mid-tier Marriott in Wilmington, Delaware, drinking a $14 gin and tonic, waiting for a $4 million wire transfer that was never going to clear. Instead, two federal agents in cheap suits walked through the sliding glass doors, confirmed his identity, and put him in handcuffs in front of a youth volleyball team checking in for a tournament. Declan got the call from the federal public defender's office on Saturday morning. Soren wanted Declan to post bail. Declan listened to the lawyer for about 30 seconds. He was standing in our kitchen holding a mug of black coffee. The morning sun was pouring through the window, catching the dust motes in the air. "My brother is dead," Declan said. Then he hung up the phone. We drove back to Scranton on Sunday. The weather had finally broken. The sky was a clear, sharp blue, the kind of autumn sky that makes everything look a little cleaner. Holt was on the front porch when we pulled up. He was wearing an old flannel shirt, sweeping the stray leaves off the wooden steps. He looked tired, deeply and permanently tired, but the heavy, suffocating weight that had pulled him toward the floor all week was gone. The house was his again. The bank accounts were still a mess, but the First National Fraud Department had formally wiped the $68,000 margin deficit. Holt's retirement savings were gone, swallowed by the market, but Declan and I were going to make him whole. We had the savings. We had the time. He would never have to worry about the electric bill or the property taxes for the rest of his life. Holt leaned the broom against the railing as I walked up the steps. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me. The title is clear, I told him gently. Wyndham backed off. The bank dropped the deficit. Holt nodded slowly. He looked out over the marigolds Harriet had planted, down the quiet suburban street he had lived on for 30 years. He reached out and wrapped his thick, calloused arms around my shoulders. He held on tight. Thank you, Cora, he whispered. We went inside. Declan started pulling ingredients out of the fridge to make sandwiches. I sat at the kitchen table, the exact same spot where I had opened the Helix statement just a few days ago. The house smelled like peppermint and old wood. The box fan hummed in the window. It was a comfortable working-class rhythm. Soren was sitting in a federal holding cell, facing 2 decades in prison. He had tried to outsmart everyone. He thought the rest of the world was just liquidity waiting to be tapped. He thought he was the smartest guy in the room. He thought people like us, people who worked quietly, who didn't brag, who didn't lease sports cars, were just hands handing out lollipops at the drive-through window. But 10 years of auditing fragile egos teaches you one universal truth. The paper trail never forgets, and it never forgives.